Welcome back, guys. This is the second of a four-part series where I'm building all my furniture for Laura here, a great friend of mine, for Kittygirl Boutique. What do you do?
I make bath products with you in mind, allergen conscious, organic ingredients, no hidden anything. So I try and make it as good as possible for you.
She'll have a link in the description down below. She's live as of this video airing. Today, I'm building this monster. It's it's the drying rack for the bath bombs. I'll go over the mistakes afterwards because there's plenty of them. So let's get to it. Let's make some sawdust. So I took a lot of time off screen getting things prepared. I ripped down all the Luan and all of the shelf pieces down into their component parts and their proper sizes, more or less. Some things I had to figure out as I went along, and that's what you see me doing here. Figuring out the exact sizes to match the space that was required. Now, while the Luan really does stink to cut, like it smells physically bad, it is so easy to cut by yourself with the table saw. Just because it's so light and floppy, you just set your fence and it cuts like butter. It really does. Very little chip out, if any, to be had, even on a stock blade from Harbor Freight. So there's something to be said about that. It's easy to work with. The only thing now is I need to get a better rip fence for my table saw. Projects for the future. And this is me just trying to figure out how to use pocket holes. I've never used them before. I always thought they were low class. But while I'm figuring this out, let me take a moment here to thank my Patreons. And I have two new members, Maria and Laura Blackwell. So thank you guys so much for joining, signing up. It really does help me. It helps my family, helps my business. And it's just nice to know that people that you guys want to help. You reach out every month to help me. So thank you. If you guys want to support me, go over to patreon.com/Knightsmith. Even $1 a month helps. I think I was a little too overcautious when I started using the pocket holes. I had never used them before, so I really wanted to make sure I did it right. But for this project, they were absolutely critical. The way I had to have the cross members situated for the panel divides, I had to make sure that there was no waver from one section to the next to isolate this smell coming off the bath bombs. I guess the essential oils could permeate from one to the other and it would make the product smell weird or something. I'm not exactly sure on the mechanics. I just built the specifications. In this application, it really did work well. Even though I was apprehensive, the pocket hole jig from Craig was awesome. And I used it in the next two pieces as well. It saved me a ton of time. I do have to say though, and you see me do this in the next cross brace, definitely clamp the pieces together. It's not that it'll come out of square or anything, but when you're driving the screw in, it does have a tendency to push the pieces apart, and it's just not fun. Now I did cut a notch in the back. I forgot to do this earlier, so I have to do it now like this. It's a slot for a 2x4 to help keep the whole thing from racking. And it's easy enough just to cut out with your jigsaw if you forget earlier. Though in hindsight, I probably should have cut at least one more and made lateral supports for in the front. That would have helped the doors from racking, as I'll explain at the end of the video. And I might even come back later and do that anyways. And here I am just marking off the shelves. Now I did cut all the shelves and all the runners off camera, but I never thought it was really that critical. You've seen me do it a million times. Even though I'm using furring strips, it's the same process. Go to chop saw, set up your stop block, run off, what was it, 40 of them or whatever I ended up cutting. So you just got to mark everything out. Be careful when you're marking, and remember which side you mark from. If you're starting marking from the bottom, always mark from the bottom, vice versa for the top. Now this piece it's a lot bigger than it looks, and there's no way I could have assembled it outside and brought it in, so I'm having my wife here help me with the assembly. Start off with the two outside pieces, just get them screwed in place, and then you can figure out the insides based off the shelf spacing. And I actually did use the shelves themselves to help me get the correct spacing, that way there was no issue down the road. And the bottoms had to be put in a nice, very special way. Honestly, it was a huge pain, but it worked out perfectly this way. Get the space, set the quick clamp, and double check everything. And hooray, it fits. Honestly though, these things fell down like a million times when I was putting it together. I wish I'd used more clamps, but at the same time it's kind of comical. And that room gets really hot and really dry as it is. So I didn't want to exacerbate it by having a million clamps in. The levity was much appreciated as the night went on. Also, I put in all the shelves just to make sure that I wasn't out of square. If you put in the bottom ones, maybe you can pinch the top and they'd be out. I didn't want to deal with that, so I just put them all in, checked everything, and went on from there. Now, if you notice, the shelves themselves aren't screwed in. That's so that they're removable to facilitate putting in and taking out the bath bombs. Now the top I had left a little long. I didn't want to mismeasure it, so I left it long, then screwed it in when the shelf was down, the rack was down. And this will also help keep everything from racking later on when I go to stand it up, screwing the top in first. Now you can see one of the sheets I cut to size earlier, I'm just using as a straight edge to run all the way across. Because if you don't have a line, you could easily misrepresent during those sections between the supports, and then you just come in and trim it off just underneath your line with a jigsaw. Easier said than done, however, it's a solution that does work for this problem. Now this piece was just barely going to fit, so I actually had to raise the bottom panel up a wee bit to clear the bottom molding that went around the room. It was about 6 inches. And yeah, the thickness of a sheet of Luan did make a huge difference here, as crazy as that might sound. I also put a lot more screws into the back pieces than necessary, again just to try and help the whole thing from racking just a little bit. And I really wish I had an extra 2 feet of breathing room in this room. Would have made the install a hell of a lot easier, but sometimes you just got to work with what you got. The good thing about raising up the bottom panel is the upper panel created a lip, so you could use the top of this whole drying rack as a sort of light storage. You know, nothing heavy can go on top of this, but it does help. It gives you a few extra feet, square foot of room, and makes life a little bit nicer. Because storage space is always at a premium, especially when you have a small shop like this. Now I'm marking out the space for the plug hole, I guess we'll call it. Because inside of this whole drying rack, there is a dehumidifier that has to plug in. And that's the idea of having the whole drying rack, is to facilitate that drying as fast as possible. So it's in a small enclosed space, so the bath bombs can be dried as rapidly as possible. And now that the whole back and top are taken care of, it's time to raise the beast. Now I did have to put this little void panel on in the front, and somehow when I had assembled it, the legs had gotten slightly out of plumb. So here I am just pulling everything back into position with one of my 3-foot clamps. Screw on the front panel, and that'll also help keep everything else in line. Now this panel does, it's not removable because it's going to be behind where the project from last week is. And I mean, it fit. It just barely fit, but it fit. So putting on all the doors and using the piano hinges, it's the first time using piano hinges, and they're both easier and harder than I thought. I guess it's kind of hard to explain hanging these doors, because there's a huge hump in the middle of the floor that I had to try and work around. And in hindsight, I probably should have put some sort of trim or something around these doors to make it look a little bit better aesthetically, as well as to help reinforce the Luan, because it did tend to warp a little bit, and it doesn't give the best seal possible. So just something I need to try to take into account for the future. But man, was it nice getting these doors on, seeing this become a real physical thing instead of just a drawing on a piece of paper. Also, there are so many tiny screws. I need to find a better way to use piano hinges if I'm going to be using them in the future. And if you guys have any tips or tricks for me, let me know in the comment section down below, because I would be very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Also, I think having the trim on the doors would have been a little bit easier to put the door pulls on, because I don't think they accounted for someone putting a drawer handle or door handle on some material that's just so thin. But it all came together and it all worked out, which was nice. These are also magnetic close. Alright guys, thanks for sticking through that. I know that was a painful experience. What happened with the doors here is there's a big bump in the floor that I didn't notice or account for. It just screwed everything up. So the doors are all janked up. This one fits. It's not where the bump is. Ta-da! So I'm gonna actually make a whole new video explaining and showing how to correct for this in the future. But the idea of this whole thing is she has I don't know if you can see it or not, there's a dehumidifier down there. So there's 3 separate sections. And this will dry the bath bombs out much faster, and I guess that gives it a better...
Basically what it does is it makes them stronger and last longer. It also means that they'll fit better in the bath and not fall apart in shipping, because that was the biggest problem I had. Kittygirl Boutique version 1 was everything was falling apart. So this is going to make it possible for me to make different scents of bath bombs, make them higher quality, and make them a little easier to make as well.
Good. So guys, if you guys know any, like if your girlfriend or your wife or whoever makes bath bombs, either send her to this lady or show her this video so you can build one for her. Just saying. Guys, thanks for watching. Check out Kittygirlboutique.com. She does make amazing products. I've tried several of them myself, and I've bought several for my wife, and she loved them. So you might too. Or your lady, I know there's birthdays, Valentine's, Christmas, there's always a holiday or a reason to buy something.
I make gift baskets.
There you go. So, stick around for part 3 and part 4 the following 2 weeks. Thanks for watching, guys, and thank you for helping make this world better, one kerf at a time, and I'll see you next week.